Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Cummings, and welcome. We're very glad you're with us. On Tuesday, Central New Yorkers in 4 counties will choose a representative for Congress, the newly drawn 24th Congressional District. Let's take a look at the map of the 24th. That district now includes the counties shaded in light blue. All of Cayuga County, all of Onondaga County, all of Wayne County, and roughly the western half of Oswego County, including the cities of Oswego and Fulton. If you are a registered voter in that light blue shaded area in the 24th, you have a choice to make this year among 3 candidates on Election Day. And if the polls are accurate, every vote will matter because this race is considered a toss-up, too close to call. And so if you're undecided tonight, the next hour may help you make up your mind and in turn may help decide this election. Let's meet now the 3 candidates for Congress in Central New York's 24th Congressional District. From left to right, Marie Buerkle, the incumbent Republican Congresswoman running for re-election. In the center of your screen is Ursula Rozum. Ursula is the Green Party candidate for Congress in the 24th this year. And on the far right is Democrat Dan Maffei, challenging for the seat as well. Each candidate tonight will have 60 seconds to answer my questions, and we will allow rebuttals if needed and as needed, and if we do need them, an additional 30 seconds will be given to each candidate to debate each other until we move on to the next question. And based on a drawing just moments ago, the very first question will be answered first by Congresswoman Marie Buerkle. First, I want you all to take a look at this graphic. I'll tell you what it means, but it's based on a report first published by Bloomberg Businessweek, and it was entitled USA Inc. It shows in that red line that takes off that combining Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the interest on the national debt, all of those combined will exceed total government revenues in this country by the year 2025. And then by 2040 will be 50% more than all the government currently collects in taxes. And that assumes that the tax collections recover to traditional levels of about 20% of GDP, which is a big assumption and a big if. So Congresswoman Buerkle, how would you propose changing the entitlement programs, which are clearly at the heart of our problem in America, changing them to keep the program solvent, because it's clear that taxes won't get the job done?
Thank you, Dan, and thanks for hosting this event today. You know, as evidenced by what you just showed us, we have a problem in this country, and unless we have the moral fortitude to get a balanced budget amendment in place and really look at these entitlements and where our money is going. Right now, the current entitlement systems and the way they're set up, they perpetuate themselves every year. They're not looked at. There are no changes being proposed to them, and they just continue on. And we know how dramatic Medicare and Medicaid spending has gone up. And it creates a tremendous burden on our county and on our property taxes here in Onondaga County. So we've got to do, and I think what the House did last year was cut, cap, and balance, where we cut spending, where we cap our spending, and we put a balanced budget into place so that we have a spending plan. The problem is that the Senate has failed to take up a budget. So there is no serious spending plan on the table other than what the Republicans have proposed, and it's so difficult for us to negotiate with ourselves.
Ms. Rozum.
Well, I would have to disagree that taxes can't get the job done. We just need the right kinds of taxes. I support lifting the tax cap that exists now on Social Security taxes, and we need to have those making over $110,000 contributing to Social Security. So I support lifting the tax cap. And to stabilize healthcare costs, stabilize Medicare costs, I am in favor of Medicare for all. Multiple studies have shown that this is the most cost-effective system because it takes the profits that are going right now to the private insurance bureaucracy and to the monopoly profits of big pharmaceutical companies and puts them into care. So really, if we're concerned about preserving these programs for the people that need them, the working people in Central New York, we do need to reform how these programs work. So we need to lift the tax cap on Social Security, and we need Medicare for all.
Mr. Maffei.
Well, I think we need a balanced approach. I think that the most important thing to do is that we have to make sure that we balance the budget, but do it in the right way, not in the backs of our seniors or the middle class. We should do it the way President Clinton did it. Ask for shared sacrifice, particularly from millionaires and billionaires who can afford to pay more and if they go back to the Clinton rates. We should get rid of these tax breaks for oil companies. They don't mean anything. Yesterday, Exxon again showed that they have record profits. We can save money where we should. But I will take one little exception with a question. You mentioned, you put all so-called entitlements in one place. There certainly are budget issues, and there's some issues with Social Security and Medicare, but I do not, Dan, I do not think that those are the problem. Social Security and Medicare need to be adjusted, but they don't need to be thrown away. We had over 50% of seniors in poverty before that. Now it's less than 10%. We can make those adjustments, but we need to protect them.
Well, okay, but let's go around this again. We'll start with Ms. Rozum. We'll take it one at a time. Medicare, even under the Affordable Care Act, Medicare as we've known it won't survive much beyond the next decade or so. That's why I'm asking this question. So let me ask specifically, do you favor turning part of this program over to private vouchers for those under the age of 55? And if not, what specifically, please, would you do for Medicare to make sure that that red line doesn't keep going right through the roof?
Well, like I stated in my answer before, I do support Medicare for all. So I don't support the voucherized program, and I don't think our healthcare should not be a profit-driven industry. It needs to be care-driven, and as patients, as consumers, we need to have the choices of doctors and we can't be constrained by the insurance bureaucracy. So Medicare for all does stabilize costs.
Mr. Maffei.
Well, first of all, we have added 9 years to the solvency of Medicare from what it was. But the key thing that we have to do is to get healthcare costs down. That process has been started, but it needs to continue. And that means that we have to be able to negotiate again and work to continue to lower costs, particularly for seniors. But voucherization is the worst thing. That would mean that every senior would be about $6,000 short of just affording what they can afford now. And the worst thing about it is it doesn't even work. Under the plan, the Ryan plan that Marie Buerkle supports, we wouldn't even balance the budget until 2040, and Medicare would become a program where, sure, you'd have a certain amount of money, but there would be no guarantee whatsoever that money would be able to afford any level of coverage for the senior.
Ms. Buerkle.
I think, Dan, that in all of this campaign there have been a number of distortions and lies that have been promoted by Dan Maffei, and this is one of them. The Affordable Care Act, as you pointed out, cuts Medicare for current seniors by $700 billion. Medicare has been changed for our seniors right now unless we repeal this Affordable Care Act. The Ryan budget is not a voucher program. It is a needs-based, government-supported premium program. It had bipartisan support. Senator Wyden from Oregon put together a plan with the House, and that plan was, as you turn and you become eligible for Medicare, you have choices, and you can shop around for a Medicare plan and have the government subsidize and provide premium support for you, but it's needs-based. And the thought with that is that if you are wealthy, you don't need that premium support. That is where we'll save money and help to get the system back on its feet and make it solvent. The other part of that is you can choose within the Ryan plan, you can choose to stay in the current government-run Medicare. And I think this scare tactic for our seniors has been really reprehensible.
But it would pull $700 billion out of the program as well, wouldn't it? 30 more seconds from each of you on the Ryan plan versus what's there. He'd also take a lot of money out of Medicare by doing this, right?
He had to do that by law because you start at that baseline, and so that's where he started. But what's different with Ryan's plan versus this Affordable Care Act, the Affordable Care Act uses that $700 billion to fund the entitlements and the other parts of the Affordable Care Act. What Ryan did is he put that money back into the Medicare system to make it solvent, to make it healthier, so that seniors, current seniors receiving Medicare, can count on that Medicare plan to be there for them.
Ms. Rozum. You get 30 seconds more here.
Thank you. Well, what we're hearing, this back and forth, just shows how complicated and dysfunctional our healthcare system is right now. And I would be against repealing, for example, the Affordable Care Act, but we need to really improve it. And that's why I support Medicare for all, to make it easier on employers, for example, to offer healthcare to their employees without having to worry about the insurance bureaucracy that's really who profits in our current healthcare system. So, I'm opposed to the Affordable Care Act. We need something better.
Mr. Maffei.
Well, I think Medicare and Social Security are sacred trusts. We've counted on them for so many years, so many generations. What Marie Buerkle says, she even says in her literature, is she says, well, don't worry if you're over 55. In fact, there are some cuts that she supported even if you are over 55. But I don't just want Medicare and Social Security to be solvent for people over 55. I want it to be solvent for future generations, because it's been such an important program that has given this bedrock support. That's why I'll fight for it.
I'll start with you and try to wrap up this health care thing, because I know where you stand, but give yourself each a minute to talk about it. If the next Congress, Mr. Maffei, should attempt again to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and if you're a member of that Congress, would you support it? But short of wholesale repeal, if you don't support it, and I know you don't, what parts of this health care law would you change? What needs changing? Yeah. And what would you support?
Yeah, well, I think there are several areas where we do need to make changes. And part of the problem, part of the reason why I wouldn't support repealing the Affordable Care Act is it's not going to happen. And there are a lot of things in it that are very important. For instance, we do need to stand up to insurance companies. We can't just give away the store, particularly with Medicare, send seniors out in the private insurance market, give them a voucher and say, okay, go fend for yourself, and hopefully the private insurance companies won't take advantage of you. What we do is we make sure that people have coverage even with pre-existing conditions. We make sure that people don't face lifetime limits. I knew a woman, Nancy St. Ange, God rest her soul, she passed away of cancer, but she was not only a cancer patient, but she was a cancer patient advocate, and she ran into so many people who had to face cancer and bankruptcy at the same time. We avoid that. Make sure that people under age 21. So there are a number of things I would change, certainly to help lower costs, but we shouldn't just repeal it. We should move forward.
Ms. Buerkle.
Well, as you know, I've been a very ardent supporter of repealing the Affordable Care Act. And 2 years ago when I ran, it was because, in principle, I disagreed with it. But over the last 22 months, I've heard from Upstate Medical Center who fears bankruptcy because of the loss of funding they'll receive because of the Affordable Care Act. Krause just recently laid off 25 people. St. Joseph's has to pay a $3 million penalty pursuant to the Affordable Care Act. Welsh Allen has laid off 10% of their workforce because of the tax. Tracy's Equipment in North Syracuse has to pay a 3.8% tax on passive income. This law was not bipartisan. It was not well thought out. It is doing nothing to decrease the cost of health care. There's no tort reform in it. It really puts the government squarely in the middle of our healthcare decisions. And when you talk about the cuts to Medicare and the impact that this will have on our seniors, this law needs to be revised. It needs to be repealed and revised, including some of those good points with pre-existing conditions, keeping your child on your policy till they're 26, the donut hole for Medicare. Those are good things. That's what we've heard people like. They could be rolled into a new law.
Ms. Rozum?
Well, like I said, I do support Medicare for all, so that I would not support repealing the Affordable Care Act, because there's too many parts of it that people just like. Staying on your parents' insurance into your 20s, that insurance companies can't drop you because of a pre-existing condition. These are good things. But what I would do in Congress is work with the progressive members of Congress and with people around the country to pass a bill like what's been proposed already, H.R. 676, a Medicare for all plan across the country that would get the insurance companies out of the way, that would allow Medicare, and also that would allow Medicare to negotiate with drug companies, because that's one of our problems right now is drug prices are too high because Medicare cannot negotiate with the drug companies to bring down the costs of drugs. And so just this discussion about health care is indicative of the dysfunction in Washington, because the Affordable Care Act with its insurance mandate is based on a plan that was originally developed by Republicans, and now no one can agree on it, which just shows it's not working for the American people, and we need something better. We need Medicare for all.
All right, Ms. Buerkle, we're expecting something from Congress after Election Day. We don't know when, we don't know what, but to deal with the fiscal cliff, as it's been called. There could be large tax increases that'll kick in and large automatic spending cuts if Congress does nothing. They'll probably do something, because at the last minute, if you don't, economists are pretty sure we'll have another recession. So what should be done to get a broader deficit reduction plan in place, combining, well, you tell me, extend the Bush-era tax cuts for whom, if not for all, and why?
Well, the House already voted a couple months ago actually, with bipartisan support to extend the current tax rates for the next year. One of the problems we have with our economy is that there's so much uncertainty when it comes to businesses. They don't know what their tax rate's going to be. They don't know what regulation's going to come down the pike. So they hunker down, and they don't grow, they don't expand, and they don't hire. We've got to deal with sequestration, but the budget, those tax rates should be extended for a year, and we should not raise taxes. My personal belief is we should not raise taxes on any Americans. It will disparately affect the middle class. It will affect all Americans, and in an economy that's so fragile as the one we have right now, it would be a mistake to raise taxes. The last Congress in 2010 knew that. President Obama knew that. You don't raise taxes when the economy is so fragile. It will hurt and it will impact businesses and the job creators. And what we want to do is we want to encourage them and help them grow so they can hire and get our economy back on track.
So you'd leave them in place for the next year and then beyond?
I would.
Ms.
I believe
Rozum.
it's the right thing to do.
I support keeping or extending the Bush tax cuts for the bottom 90% of income earners, and I would support progressive marginal tax rates on the top 10%, those that have done well in our economy in the past 40 years. I support the Eisenhower rates that had about 2 dozen brackets, and with the Eisenhower rates we could raise $1.2 trillion, which is more than last year's deficit. But I would be in favor of spending those revenues to stimulate the economy, because the real problem right now is that consumers are over indebted and out of work, and so private businesses can't hire and can't produce and expand production if there's no customers. So we need working people need to be put back to work and need money in their pockets. I would also support cutting the military budget by 50%, saving us $350 billion a year, as well as closing corporate tax loopholes and ending subsidies and giveaways to big energy industries.
Mr. Maffei.
Well, I wouldn't go quite as far back as President Eisenhower, but I certainly would look to President Clinton for some indication of what we need to do. I do think we need to share the sacrifice. So I guess I'm in between. I think that we can protect small businesses and farms by not raising taxes on any income under $1 million. But when you get to over $1 million, we're not talking about small businesses and farms then. We're talking about multimillionaires and billionaires. And if we are, then we can negotiate that. And then I do think we've got to get rid of these tax breaks that help jobs move overseas, replace those with better tax cuts for manufacturers here at home, and get rid of those tax breaks for oil companies. The problem with what Marie Buerkle says is her rhetoric is good. I mean, I can agree with a lot of what she says, but then what she does is she went to Washington and she voted to raise taxes on every working family in New York State. John Boehner didn't vote that way, and it didn't pass. But she was the one member of this delegation, of the whole entire congressional delegation, who voted to raise taxes on the middle class. So if it's the wealthy, no, but if it's the middle class.
But we'll go 30 seconds more on this, starting with Congresswoman Buerkle.
Well, what Dan Maffei constantly does is distort my record and tears it down because he is unwilling to take responsibility for his own record when he was in Congress. You know, records are real and one has to be responsible for them. The issue with taxes, and he talks about over $1 million, so many of the small businesses, and if you talk to them in the district, file a personal tax return. They file a subchapter S. This raising taxes on anyone will disparately affect our job creators and all small businesses. They don't need to be taxed any further.
Go ahead, Ms. Rozum.
Sure. I support the Eisenhower rates because we know that they could raise $1.2 trillion, according to research done at the Chicago Political Economy Institute. And what we're not hearing from Anne-Marie or from Dan is how they plan on raising the money to cover the deficit. Dan's plan covers 5% of the last year's deficit at best, and Anne-Marie doesn't want to bring in any other revenue. So they have to tell us which programs are they going to cut, or do they plan on running deficits?
Dan, you get another 30 seconds before I go back at that one. Go ahead.
Well, actually, you do raise about 70%, and actually about 80. You raise 81% of what the president would raise if you cap it at $1 million. Look, I think it's 0.1% of the district. So this idea that there's all these small businesses and farms in the district that pay over $1 million. Look, Marie Buerkle is trying to protect her wealthy friends. I realize that there's a point of view there, but this idea that I'm distorting her record, she's been the congresswoman for the last 2 years.
Okay. And we'll see what happens on Tuesday for the next 2 years. That's why we're all here. I want to go back, though, start in the middle with the woman in the middle, because I think you might be right. Let's talk about Simpson-Bowles, the bipartisan commission that was put together. They studied this thing in great detail, the deficit. They came up with a plan to substantially reduce it. Among other things, it would simplify and lower tax rates across the board. But it would also limit some very popular deductions to bring in more revenue, i.e. mortgage interest deductions and some health care deductions too that we all enjoy right now. So do you support that part of the Simpson-Bowles plan? Lower the tax rates, but get rid of the substantial part of some of these big deductions that are costing us revenue now?
Well, we need to keep the deductions that are helping working people that are really struggling right now, like the child care deductions, the health care deductions, the mortgage deductions. But we need to figure out, do we want to, do we want a fair approach to balancing the budget and addressing the deficit, or do we want to balance it on the backs of working people? I mean, the other parts of Simpson-Bowles are things like lowering the cost of living adjustment on Social Security. By the time I retire in 40 years, that's going to be a 12% cut in Social Security payments. And they're talking about increasing the Medicare age. So that's what, that's what we really need to be talking about. Are either of my opponents going to stand up to their party's leadership when they're talking about these kinds of cuts to Social Security and Medicare?
Mr. Maffei, Simpson-Bowles.
I think that we need to balance the budget, and I think that there's a balanced way to do that. Simpson-Bowles has a lot of good suggestions in it. It was not meant to be legislation necessarily, and it may offer us good guidance. But I also think that, as President Clinton did when he balanced the budget, we need to look at that. And President Clinton was here. We talked about it. We know the formula. It's not that complicated. You raise taxes on people who can afford it, but that's people over $1 million, bringing them back to the Clinton rates, where they did quite well. Thank you very much. And on these oil companies, that's a lot of revenue. You also make sure that we do have economic growth, and that means making some key investments, particularly in areas like transportation and infrastructure, making sure that we have strong businesses in central New York that can move people in and out. So I do think there's a lot of things that we need to look at. I mean, we need to, in a collective approach, but it does need to be a balanced approach, not all cuts. We can't cut our way out.
Ms. Buerkle.
Well, I agree, we can't cut our way out. We need to have a pro-growth economic agenda, but I must smile because Dan Maffei's new best friend is Bill Clinton. He's had him up here in the district. His chief of staff was Ursula Rozum. I was one of 38 members of the House who voted for that budget because I thought it was a good bipartisan way to begin this discussion and get our spending under control. Yes, I have the courage to stand up to leadership because that was something that they encouraged us not to vote for, and it was something that was well thought out. It had bipartisan support, and it was a good first attempt. Let's sit down and discuss how we're going to balance this budget, get spending under control. Mr. Maffei's Congress didn't even have the moral. They had all three houses. They had the White House, the Senate, and the House, and they didn't pass a budget for 2 years. That's reprehensible, and that's a dereliction of duties, I believe.
We'll move on because somebody mentioned a moment ago wealthy friends. It appears that at least the two major party candidates have a lot of wealthy friends. This is pushing an $8 million race now. There was a byline report in the Post-Standard this week by Mark Wiener. He used FEC records to show that almost $5 million of the money that's come into this district race has come from super PACs, outside groups, people that don't live here. A few $100,000 last week alone to your campaign from Mayor Bloomberg in New York. Other Washington-based groups have poured in 6 figures. The Conservative 60+ Association for Ms. Buerkle, the League of Conservation Voters for You. It's a long list, it's big, and it's running way up, way high. So this one starts with you, Mr. Maffei. If you get elected Tuesday, won't you in fact be beholden to the people and the organizations who got you elected by paying for all those attack ads, all the negative commercials that we've seen since before Labor Day?
Look, I'm answerable to one group of people, and that's the voters of this district. It is a very diverse district. It is important that any representative represent all different sides. But I do think that it's deplorable, the kind of money that comes into politics. And the Citizens United decision of the Supreme Court, I believe, was wrong-headed. It said that corporations are people. Marie Buerkle, I believe you agreed with that in one of your town hall meetings, but I disagree. But if that is the case, then I think we need a constitutional amendment to change that. I think we need to make sure that we go to the people and have people-centered campaign finance reform. And I did sponsor that when I was in office, and I also sponsored the Disclose Act to make sure that at least we know where this is all coming from. Look, it's not a good thing, and it's probably the hardest on the candidates. We don't even know what's coming in ourselves.
Well, Ms. Buerkle.
Well, let me begin by saying I have concerns when Michael Bloomberg spends $600,000 on this race. My concern is he's going to try to tell upstate New York how to live their lives like he's doing downstate. People who contribute to your campaign, whether it's an individual or it's a PAC, it's free speech. It really is supporting candidates who espouse your principles. I'm proud to have had the U.S. Chamber of Commerce endorsement, National Federation of Independent Businesses. These are pro-growth, pro-economic agencies that really are America's job creators, and so I'm proud of that. 60+ endorsed me because they understand that the Affordable Care Act cuts Medicare for our seniors. So the kinds of support I've had has been consistent with my principles. I will say that the ads that Dan Maffei has run, the nasty, negative, distorted ads, are ones that he has personally run, along with unions and the DCCC. And our ads have been about my message and what I intend to do and what I have done. I'm proud of my record.
Ms. Rozum,
Well,
talk money?
Sure. Well, the Green Party refuses all corporate donations, and unlike Anne Marie, I don't believe that corporations are people, and the problem with corporate money in politics existed before Citizens United. Citizens United just really aggravated the situation, and I think all voters should be outraged about the amounts of money, the amounts of outside money coming in to influence our local election. And so I do really give Dan Maffei credit for sponsoring the campaign finance legislation while he was in Congress. And I also support an amendment to reverse Citizens United, but we also need an amendment to abolish corporate personhood, because corporations aren't people. They do the work that we entrust them to do, but ultimately they are not individuals with freedom of speech. They might be made up of individuals, but all those people have their own vote and can donate themselves to political campaigns. So we really need, in addition to campaign finance reform, we also need to abolish corporate personhood, and we need electoral reform, instant runoff voting and proportional representation, so people can vote for what they want.
I'll give each 30 seconds before we take a break to actually answer the question I asked. Won't you be beholden to all of these PACs come January if you're elected, Mr. Maffei?
No, I won't.
Despite all that money?
I will not be. I will be beholden to the voters of this district. That's the fact. I was in office for 2 years. There were all sorts of people who said, well, you're going to do this or that because this, and I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I voted as best I could with the people of this district, Dan.
Ms. Buerkle, you get the phone calls in January from all these groups that have poured money into your campaign. They're going to want something back, aren't they?
I think my record speaks for itself, that I'm willing to stand and represent this district in the best interests of this district. You know, Mr. Maffei's record is one where he voted for the Affordable Care Act knowing full well that it was going to hurt Welsh Allen and hurt our local hospitals. My record is different than that. I voted against leadership on the Budget Control Act, against leadership for Simpson Bowles. This payroll tax cut that Dan refers to was something that would encourage and make Social Security more solvent, and that was a very important vote if we're concerned about Social Security and keeping it viable for seniors.
Ms. Rozum.
I'm the only candidate in this race that has never taken and never will take money from Wall Street, from Goldman Sachs, from the military contractors, from the nuclear power industry, and over the years they've donated to both my opponents. So we want to be optimistic and believe what they say, but the money really does have an influence on our political system. So until we pass these kinds of reforms that get corporate money out of politics so we can get the people back in, our democracy is just going to be corrupted by corporate money. So I hope that whichever one of us gets into office keeps working to get special interest money out of our political system.
Okay, we'll take a break. We need to make a little money ourselves. It's going to be a short break. We're back with the rest of our debate when we return. Welcome back. We're talking with the candidates for Congress in Central New York's 24th District. Still on money for a moment. Ms. Buerkle, Ms. Rozum went very public this week by writing checks to charity from checks that had come her way from a Florida family that gave her thousands of dollars just this week, a family that had also given money to your campaign. And she said in so doing, well, it's apparent to me that this money was given to me simply to help me get votes away from Dan Maffei and elect Marie Buerkle to Congress. Are you aware of that, those donations to her, and what do you make of it? Was that a coordinated effort on somebody's part?
Certainly not. Certainly not. I became aware of it when my staff mentioned that Ursula was having a press conference. That's something I just don't have control over. I have no way of knowing who's going to contribute what and where. I think the bigger concern really should be Michael Bloomberg and the investment he's made in this race. I think that $600,000 is a substantial amount of money to push an agenda that is not consistent with Upstate's values.
Well, Ms. Rozum, when you made your announcement this week and wrote those checks back to charity, you said, "It's dirty money, I don't want it." You drew the obvious implication, in your opinion, and that I've just stated, that a vote for Rozum is basically a vote for Buerkle in this campaign, in the opinion of those who may have provided that money. Do you see yourself as a spoiler in this race?
I see myself as giving voters a choice in this race because as we've seen just in the last couple of answers, my positions are very different from either of the two candidates. And so the real problem is that our electoral system is basically making people go crazy. People are saying that a vote for Ursula is a vote for Anne Marie, when really it's a vote for the Green Party on row F. Our electoral system, it makes the people want to game our elections by giving either hundreds of thousands of dollars or a couple $1,000s, like in my case. And so what we really need is we need electoral reforms. We're talking about things like instant runoff voting that allow people to vote for their preferred candidate without worrying of helping their worst enemy. And so what we need is we need leadership in Congress that's willing to change our antiquated election system.
Mr. Maffei.
I certainly think Ursula Rozum did the right thing, and I think that we should look at things like electoral reform. It shouldn't be one of these things where a candidate can win the election without winning a majority of the vote. So I support those sort of things. Like I said, I'm for campaign finance reform. We've got to get the money out of politics, no matter who the money comes from. I'm not going to attack any particular supporter of Marie Buerkle, but we've got to get the money out of politics if it's going to. And it's kind of funny, Dan, because I know a lot of it goes on TV, and I'm not, and it does run our TV stations, I guess, but it can get to a point, particularly now. I mean, my mother has moved, well, not moved, but she's rented a house in Geneva for a couple months because she doesn't want to see all these negative ads against her son. And they're starting to get to her. Well, I'm glad to say she's finally leaning Maffei again, but it took a while to reconvince her after seeing all those negative ads run by you, Marie Buerkle, and your supporters against me.
Talk about them a little more. Ms. Rozum, we'll start with you this time. Pretend you had money, the kind of money that the major party candidates have, and you wanted to produce a spot that was of your writing and of your design. What would you spend 30 or 60 seconds on positively if you had the money?
I'd spend 30 to 60 seconds outlining what we call the Green New Deal, which is basically a plan to put people back to work like we did during the WPA, but meeting 21st century needs. There's so many unmet needs, from after school programs to our renewable energy sector really does need to be developed so we can have real energy independence. So basically, I would want to spend the money putting forward the kind of positive vision for where we want to go and how can we really help our communities, because we know that voters and TV watchers just feel abused in this election.
Well, Dan Maffei, your mom doesn't like the ads. You say you don't like them. Get money out of politics. So now you take a couple million, make a commercial that's positive. What would you say?
We've got that commercial running right now.
What's it say?
Well, it talks about how it's important to move the economy forward, to stop having the arguments of the past, and how we have to focus on jobs. I mean, I'll admit it's difficult in 30 seconds, but I do think we do that, and we talked about it in our first ad as well. But if you're implying that we should never do an ad that's critical of our opponent's record, then I'm not sure if I agree. We should do both. There's things about Marie Buerkle's record that had not been brought to light that I think are very, very important, and I don't think they're very important just because of me, but countless women, for instance, from across the district, including Nancy Green, a rape survivor from Syracuse, came to me and told me about this bill that she co-sponsored, the same bill that Todd Akin did, that redefined rape, that had this language in it, and she even gave a floor statement for it. Holding her accountable for that is part of a campaign, and I don't think that's necessarily negative if you're talking about a record.
Ms. Buerkle, your turn. You have a minute on this issue.
Yeah, I think Dan Maffei really sunk to a new low in this campaign, and I think the people out in the district, whether they agree with me or not, would agree with that. Those are campaign ads that he ran, never with a vision, never about his record, not with a vision going forward, but just attacks, distortions and distractions from his record. The rape ad that he talks about was reprehensible. He hid behind the skirts of victims of rape. I'm a mother with 4 daughters. I'm a grandmother of 4 granddaughters. I've worked at Vera House for many, many years as a volunteer. And it's reprehensible that he would use and distort what happened with H.R. 3. That bill was about federal funding for abortion, except for in the cases of rape incest, and life of the mother. There was no forcible language in the bill that was voted on by the House. It's reprehensible. It's a new low, I think, when it comes to campaigns. And we've heard from women who have had to listen to that, victims of rape, who've had to listen and relive their experience. And that, to me, is that's when a candidate will say or do anything to be reelected.
Dan Maffei, you've got 30 seconds. Is it an issue that people should take into account when they vote on Tuesday?
Absolutely. Look, it was Marie Buerkle who held me account for every word of every bill that I ever co-sponsored. This was a 3-page bill. When she co-sponsored it, the language was in there. Look, I know it was about abortion, and it was about the fact that Marie Buerkle doesn't want there to be any federal funding for abortions. Even in the case of rape and incest, she said, this bill parsed rape in order for it to not be covered in the cases of certain kinds of rape, like date rape. That is something that is just not excusable. You don't parse rape for any reason. And that's why I think it's an important part of her record. I'm not talking about her motivations or her background. Those are all fine. But it's her record that you have to focus on.
The original language did include the phrase forcible rape.
But yes, that's the U.S. criminal code that's been used for years. And it was taken out and modernized the language to rape. The bill that was voted on did not parse out rape. It said rape is rape is rape. And it's so offensive to me and so many other women in this district that Dan Maffei would believe that he knows more about this issue, more about women, more about the struggles that women have had. It's almost laughable if it wasn't to the detriment of so many victims of rape. He needs to be held accountable for this ad, and we have taken a very strong position about it.
Angela, you can comment on this if you want to, or save your time for later if you choose.
I'll save my time for later, but you know, I'm glad I'm here to separate the two of them.
Well, that may be good, but this next one starts with Mr. Maffei as well. So let me just ask you, since we love debates and we've encouraged one here, let me characterize and have you respond. Take a minute. The ads, the negative ads in sum toto have come down to something like this. You're DC Dan Maffei, you're an outsider, the district fired you 2 years ago, why should they hire you back now? Your policies are out of step with the rest of the district now anyway, and with where our economy stands now. Do you want to take a minute and give me a 60-second response to the worst of the attacks on you, or at least what you believe them to be? This is free time now. You got 60 seconds.
Sure. Well, since you just repeated my opponent's ads,
we'll get to her in a minute.
You don't have to run one of hers now. Yeah. Look, I was born and raised in the district, and I've worked here. I worked here at Channel 9, in fact. For several years. I worked in the private sector. I worked for Pinnacle Capital Management. I have worked in Washington too. I worked for Daniel Patrick Moynihan. So, you know, you look at someone's background, there's a variety of things. But when I was growing up and I was working at my grandparents' electroplating plant, you know, it really taught me to sort of see how it is, what the struggle is in central New York. And that struggle continues. Look, I live the American dream, and I believe Ursula Rozum did, and Marie Buerkle did. The difference, though, is that I think that we have to make it so everybody lives that American dream.
Well, here, Marie Buerkle, the ads that have come at you have indicated that you're out of touch, extreme, way extreme, far, far right on the spectrum, and simply not in lockstep with what most of the 24th District feels, and that you're too extreme to return to office, that you only maybe came into office 2 years ago on a midterm Republican wave, and now it's time to usher out that little anomaly and bring back the Democrats. So you're too extreme. You got a minute to talk about that.
Well, that's the narrative that Dan Maffei, and generally that's a national campaign that the Democrats are waging across the country. If they can marginalize Republicans and marginalize our records and say that we're too extreme, and then, as Dan often puts, he's the moderate between Ursula and myself. Well, I think Jim Walsh's comments in the paper the other day set that record very clear. Dan Maffei has a record, and that record is real, and that record is a liberal record of spending and taxing. I voted against leadership. I voted for Simpson-Bowles. We just talked about that. I voted against the Budget Control Act. The reason I'm in step with my district is because I have spent the last 22 months talking to hundreds of people, 40+ town hall meetings, 60+ mobile town hall units, meeting with hospitals, physicians, farmers. We've done incredible amounts of conversations and getting to the issues that face this district. That's why I'm in touch with this district. That's why I know what the issues are. Dan Maffei came in here in 2006 after being gone for many, many years to challenge Jim Walsh.
Okay, Ursula, you want to come back in now?
Sure, what's the question?
Well, I'll tell you what, the question is, you haven't been the subject of these attack ads that each of them have thrown at each other, but you've got a positive message that you want to get out on a lot of these issues, and I'll give you another 60 seconds right now on an issue of your choosing.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm a Central New York native, born and raised here in Syracuse. My parents came from Poland in the 1980s. They had been active with the anti-communist Solidarity Trade Union, and they came here basically believing that this is the kind of country where if you work hard, you can create a good life for your family, and that's not really the case anymore. The American dream is really far out of reach of too many people. So what I support is the Green New Deal, which is public investment to put people back to work, meeting today's challenges. That means addressing unmet community needs, whether it's updating our 100-year-old sewers in Syracuse, developing renewable energy so we can have real energy independence. I support these kinds of policies to put meet our community needs and put money in working people's pockets. And I think we need new leadership. I've said this before, that my opponents really represent the worst of both their parties. And while they both have some really positive qualities, whether it's Anne Marie's commitment to veterans or the public campaign legislation Dan Maffei sponsored, I think we need new leadership and policies that have worked in the past.
All right, let's go to a policy issue that may or may not be on the high profile at the federal level. In the wake of the hurricane this week, Ms. Buerkle, people in New York City and the tri-state area probably aren't too eager to see how high the ocean levels and storm surges might become in the years to come. Sandy was a weather event. Over time, weather events become our climate. A two-part question. Are you convinced that climate change and the direction of global warming is real? And do you believe it's been caused by human activity? If so, what should the federal role be in reversing it?
Well, I've said, and I'm on record as saying, that climate change is real. But the question is, and I don't believe it's been decided by science, as to what man's role is in creating climate change. And so I think the reasonable approach is to take the interest into account, rather than taking this radical, all we worry about is the climate and the environment, as Dan did with cap and trade, and rather look and balance all the interest. And that's not what's being done right now. You know, when you have 50 former NASA scientists criticizing NASA and saying that this climate change and whether man is causing it or not is still in question, and not to take such a radical role, I think we all need to take a step back and have a reasonable approach. You've got to balance interests. There's the energy needs, there's the environmental needs, there's personal individual rights. There's a whole lot of issues, and unless, we cannot take such a radical, we've got to balance those interests and make sure that all of those interests are taken into account.
Ms. Rozum?
What's radical and unreasonable is denying the human impacts on the climate crisis. And it's very scary what Anne Marie here is saying. And I don't know if any amount of scientific evidence could convince her, because she's obviously been bought off by people like Exxon and all these think tanks that promote denying of climate science. What we really need is we need a policy, a climate action policy, to help us transition to renewable energy and stop wasting energy and really put people back to work. There's 3 to 4 times as many jobs in the renewable energy sector as there is in the fossil fuel industry for equal investment. And there's so much work that can be done, weatherizing and retrofitting homes. And so a climate action policy is really a win for our economy, because it puts people back to work, and it's a win for our environment and for our climate. And we cannot bury our heads in the sand like Anne Marie has decided to do.
Mr. Maffei.
I mean, you listen to our Governor Cuomo this week, and he talking about how these weather effects, we do need to do whatever we can do. I believe they're man-made, because that's what scientists tell me. I actually spent a year teaching at the College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and their president, Neil Murphy, very well respected, he certainly believes in climate change and man-made climate change, and we need to do something about it. The former meteorologist here at Channel 9, Dave Eichhorn, has too. Look, I think we have to listen to the scientists, and the scientists are clear, at least all the mainstream scientists. We need to do something about this. We had a huge storm this week, and this is not going to be the last one. There are going to be many, many more. I think we can do it. In the way some of the things that Ursula is talking about are very, very wise here. There's a lot of green jobs. This does not have to be an economic downturn. We can even work with companies like Nucor Steel in Auburn, who's making 95% of their steel from reused steel. But to just say it's not man-made, it's not our problem, that's the most irresponsible thing.
Well, let me ask you about something else, Ms. Rozum, that could come under the federal aegis if it happens, if you think it should. Drilling for natural gas in the shale, the hydraulic fracturing process, they call it hydrofracking a lot of places. We're under a moratorium in New York on this right now. Should this remain a state issue for regulation, or in your opinion, should it fall under the Federal Clean Water Act? And as a member of Congress, would you support that, making it a national environmental regulatory issue?
Yes, I would support it. We need to follow the examples set forward by France and Bulgaria that have already banned hydrofracking. And the truth is that water and air and climate change, they don't know state boundaries. This is an issue that affects us all. And so I do support a federal ban. And what's really scary is what we're hearing from both major party presidential candidates. They're both promoting drilling for natural gas. So while I appreciate that Dan Maffei is personally opposed to hydrofracking, I would want him to join me in calling for a federal ban. A moratorium and regulated fracking aren't going to protect us. We need to stop these kinds of risky, unconventional fossil fuel extractions, whether it's hydrofracking, mountaintop removal, deep water drilling. We saw the Gulf disaster, and we can't afford to have these kinds of accidents. They're expensive, they hurt too many people, they hurt the climate, and so I support banning hydrofracking nationally.
Mr. Maffei.
Well, I do think that we need to put it under the Clean Water Act. I sponsored legislation to that effect when I was in Congress. You know, the watersheds don't like stop at state lines. They don't say, oh, look, I'm leaving Pennsylvania and going into New York. So we clearly need national regulation on this, and I'm for the moratorium at least until we get that. You know, I'm concerned. I consider a ban, I guess, but I'm concerned about the unintended consequences of that because coal still does a lot more environmental damage than almost any other source. Look, we need to approach this in a sort of a collaborative way. We need to get to a renewable fuels economy. It's one that'll help Central New York because of the green job potential here. And we need to do it, I think, in a way that does balance out the energy needs of industry, but make sure that we're doing something on the environmental side. But again, it's just so important that we move forward. We need to work together. Compromise is always necessary, but let's move forward. Let's not just keep denying it or putting our heads in the sand.
Mr. Maffei, much of the 24th District, and for that matter the state of New York, depend on agriculture. That sector of the economy is huge. Oh, we got to go. We start with Anne Marie?
I think I have to answer that question.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, you get a minute on hydraulic fracturing. Right. Yeah, pardon me.
You know, I think one of the difficulties, and when you talk to all the folks in the district, whether it's education, whether it's agriculture, whether it's a ban on hydrofracking, when we get the federal government involved, it becomes less efficient, it becomes more expensive, and it frustrates the local people. And so I would not be in favor of this federal ban because I think it will remove the state's rights. You know, we talk about a moratorium. That's a radical, I think, a radical approach to this. It's not reasonable. Both of Dan and Ursula are opposed to fracking. They're opposed to nuclear power. They want to get onto renewables. Well, the reality is renewables are only creating about 2% of our electricity. We cannot make that. We cannot do that and make that change. So it has to be planning. It has to be. But you know, with the stimulus, we saw a lot of money going into solar panels to bankrupt companies. We saw jobs being created over in China. What we do to preserve and protect our environment has to be balanced and it has to be reasonable.
Well, 30 seconds more. Ursula, we'll go around on this again, at least give you 30. You're behind.
Sure, there's nothing unreasonable in waiting to study something. What's unreasonable is putting the future of our state and our agriculture and our water at risk. And I just need to correct Anne Marie, because she's used this number a few times, that we get 2% of our energy from renewables. No, it's right now we're at 14%. You can check on the U.S. Department of Energy website. We're getting 14% of renewables. Renewables are getting cheaper by the day, and unconventional fossil fuels are going to be more expensive because they're riskier and they cause accidents.
All right, now back to the farm, Mr. Maffei. So much of our agricultural component is huge in the state of New York. Right now, the farmers, at least come spring, they're going to be in a tough position because the farm bill's expired and they're not really sure what is going to happen, except the old safety net isn't working anymore. So what do you think the new farm bill should include? I assume you think there should be a new one. What should be in it when Congress finally gives us a different piece of legislation? Yeah,
I support the Senate negotiated farm bill. It's not perfect, but it allows us to move forward. It's bipartisan. It has the necessary insurance programs that dairies need to survive in a global workplace and make sure that they're strong. we need to move forward. So it doesn't do everything, but it does something. Is also, and I agree with you, the farming, whether we're talking about dairies or traditional farms, organic farms, fruit farms, wineries, we're becoming the Napa Valley of the Northeast now, in the Finger Lakes. That's one of the reasons why it's so important and precious that we protect our clean water. So I think that farms are very important. We need to pass this bill. It's unfortunate that a fairly small but very vibrant Tea Party faction in the House has blocked everything, including this farm bill, at least for the moment. And I think we need to get it unstuck.
Ms. Buerkle.
The talking points really are laughable. The Tea Party faction, this has not been brought up for a vote in the House. What we're talking right now is about a 3-month extension, at least to give our farmers some certainty as to what they need. There's been some discussion about taking the food assistance programs out, separating those out so we can look and meet the needs of the farmers and not have it all in one big bill. Because as you know, these big bills, there's competing interests and it becomes very difficult to accomplish what needs to be done. Upstate New York and the industries and the economy that are so significantly impacted by our farmers, we have to do what we can. That's why we voted for 3 free trade agreements. It will help our agriculture community. We'll probably increase exports from upstate New York by about $30 million, allowing our farmers to grow and export their products. We work closely with farms. We do need a farm bill. We need to give them certainty, but we've got to do it carefully and we have to do it balancing all the interests.
Ms. Rozum.
I support a farm bill that includes and maintains the funding for food stamps because that's where food stamp funding is right now. So we cannot cut this program. And we need a farm bill that supports organic and regional farming. And we need to make sure that we're not giving too many subsidies to these large monoculture crops that rely on pesticides that are ultimately causing soil erosion, that are contaminating our waterways. And I do agree with Dan. This agriculture is New York's biggest industry, and we have to protect it. And that's why we need to maintain a hydrofracking ban in central New York, well, in all of New York. And in terms of the free trade agreements, these are very complicated trade agreements. And ultimately, we need a food system that's regional, that allows our local farmers to feed local people. And we saw what happened with NAFTA, that U.S. agricultural exports devastated the Mexican agricultural economy, leading to an influx of immigrants in the U.S. So we have to be very careful when our farming industry is relying on exports and not feeding the local community.
Okay. Total time in the program. Should we go to closing statements or? Yeah, I guess we need to. Wish we didn't have to, but time is up. And so in order, we will ask for all 3 candidates now to give you a direct shot in the eye and tell you why they belong in Congress come January. We'll start with Marie Buerkle.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to Channel 9 for hosting this event today. 2 years ago, I ran for Congress because I believed that upstate New York had lost its voice in Washington. And after countless town hall meetings and teletown halls and mobile town hall units and hundreds of conversations with the wonderful people who live here, my instincts were correct. Upstate New York did lose its voice in Washington. Dan Maffei was in Congress for 2 years, and he does not want to look at or be responsible for his record. And his record is one of liberal spending. It is one of an out-of-touch representative. Upstate New York needs someone who has the courage to do what he or she says they'll do. Upstate deserves to have a representative who is accessible, someone who will listen, someone who will be their voice in Washington, someone who won't play cat and mouse and dodge debates and dodge facing our opponent, the voters here. I'm from here. I love upstate New York, and it is my home. I'm asking for your support and ask for your vote on November the 6th. Thank you so much.
Mr. Maffei, you now have 60 seconds for your closing statement to the voters.
Well, I'm very pleased, and I appreciate Dan, you and Channel 9 sponsoring us, and the other candidates. This is an important election. This matters so much to Central New York. Look, I was born and raised here, right in the city of Syracuse. If it weren't for decent public schools, I'd be a nobody. And going to work in my family small business, I did learn a lot about what it really takes. I witnessed firsthand the middle class struggle. Look, we need to move forward. Nobody is perfect, but in the last 2 years, Marie Buerkle acts like I'm still the incumbent. In the last 2 years, nothing has happened. Not even her own agenda. We've not lowered the deficit 1 penny. We're all very concerned about making sure there's jobs in Central New York, but it's 2 years later and we don't see any action there. We need to move forward. All these debates of the past just don't make any sense. So I think, again, balance the budget, do it the right way, preserve Social Security and Medicare, and make sure we make those key investments that we need to make our economy grow.
And Ursula Rozum from the Green Party, you now have 60 seconds to conclude our program with your closing statement to the voters.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to articulate a positive vision for our struggling Central New York communities. And if we can't be focused on what we don't want, we need to stand up for what we do want. I support a public jobs program to put people to work now. I support Medicare for all to provide health care as a human right and to stabilize costs. And I support a climate action plan to address the oncoming climate storm. And the Green New Deal can revive the economy while helping us to build a renewable energy future. And so I promise to be an independent voice in Congress. It's time to take our government back from Wall Street and the special interests that have taken it over, and it's time to make the rich pay their fair share again. So if you support the progressive policies I've outlined, I hope I can have your vote on November 6th.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank all three of our candidates for joining us this evening. It may be the last opportunity you get to see them all and hear all three of them talk to you about the issues that matter. Congresswoman Marie Buerkle, Ursula Rozum, Dan Maffei. We appreciate you all for being here. And you can decide now, between now and Tuesday, whether or not they answered the questions. I did my best to ask them, but it's your call as to whether or not they answered them to your satisfaction and in line with what you would like to see our next representative in Congress be. So the choice is yours. You do need to get out and vote. If you're registered, it is your civic responsibility. And if it's anything like this election was 2 years ago, and the pollsters are already telling us it's going to be close, votes will matter. And you have a duty to exercise your right to cast a ballot for somebody if you live in the 24th Congressional District. We certainly hope you do. We're certainly grateful you've joined us for this program. And on behalf of everybody at News Channel 9, I want to thank you for tuning in. Make sure you and everybody else who you know who is registered gets out to vote on Tuesday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.